What if Daphne and Celeste are a Kawaii Metal band? That's the unlikely scenario we'll be exploring on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name's Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I pick a popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I happen to have to hand in order to bring that alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Ooh Stick You by Daphne and Celeste, and I tried to reimagine that as a Kawaii Metal song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster.
You got facial hair like a polar bear. You blow up like a toad and then explode. Your face looks mean like Halloween. You got big red eyes like cherry pies. You got the IQ with degree do. You look insane and got no brain. You got fat belly with a bowl full of jelly. You got my money like salt-free glue. Stick you, your mama too. And your daddy. Stick you, your mama too. And your daddy. Stick you, your mama too. And your daddy. Stick you, stick you. You go, girl.
Now, sometimes when I'm coming up with the ideas for these what if songs, there's no particular logic to it. It's just me pairing two things together that don't seem to go at all because I think it will be funny or enjoyable or surprising. I've done plenty of those things like, Polka, Megadeth or whatever, an odd combination for the hell of it. But sometimes there is actually an internal logic to putting these things together, and that is the case this week. I do have a legit reason for pairing Daphne and Celeste and Kawaii Metal, and it all comes down to a couple of specific performances from UK music festivals, which happened 14 years apart. So if you'll bear with me, I'll try and explain what my reasoning was. So the first performance that inspired this week's choice was from Reading 2000, when Daphne and Celeste were given a 15-minute slot on the main stage. Daphne and Celeste had sort of appeared from nowhere earlier that year. I think their first single, which was Ooh Stick You, charted in the UK in January of that year. So they were a pretty new arrival on the scene. I don't know how many people remember Daphne and Celeste in this day and age, but if you're unfamiliar with their work, they were two American teenagers whose speciality was very bright, very upbeat, but really kind of bratty, slightly snotty pop music. And they had a little run of hits in the earlier part of 2000, obviously, as I say, starting with Ooh Stick You, followed by UGLY, which it wasn't quite a cover, but it interpolated a Fishbone song, which was a pretty unusual, slightly underground source to be getting inspiration from, but very much followed the formula of their debut single, high energy insult pop. And the third single was a cover of School's Out by Alice Cooper, which was a bit out of left field, but okay. They're one of these acts that instantly everyone had an opinion on, and a lot of people found them incredibly annoying, and it's easy enough to see why. It was pretty deliberately brash and obnoxious stuff, really in your face sort of helium voices, and it was kind of calculated to rub people up the wrong way to some extent, I think. But I always thought it was kind of fun. There's something quite punk rock about that whole approach, I think. I always found them to be pretty amusing and the songs to be really catchy. I think there were a few other people coming out of like the more indie underground perspective who had a similar view. I know they got the occasional good write-up in the Melody Maker and stuff, and I guess the organisers of Reading must have picked up on some of that sentiment and thought, oh well, maybe we could give this act just a little slot at the festival. Maybe people will appreciate just a little blast of this obnoxious pop. And Reading Festival, maybe the UK's oldest music festival, started out as Reading Jazz and Blues Festival back in the 50s, I think. But for most of its run, it's been largely considered to be a rock festival. From the 70s through the 80s, it was very much dealing in rock and heavy metal, maybe a little bit of punk around the edges. Maybe some of that had died away by 2000, starting to go a bit more into a sort of generic student fest by that point, but there was still a fairly hefty sort of rock contingent in the audience and a fairly hefty rock representation in the lineup. So it was quite a stylistic mismatch, but I guess the organisers just thought, people will have enough of a sense of fun to appreciate this. And did they? Did they? Hell. I wasn't actually at Reading that year. I did go to Reading several years in a row from 1996, but I think 2000 was the first one in a while that I'd missed. So I didn't get to see it in person, but I think they only got 2 songs through their 3-song set and were booed and bottled off stage, and it's kind of become the main thing that Daphne and Celeste are remembered for now. I think what got me thinking about this in the first place, having not really thought about them for years, was just seeing a video pop up on YouTube, someone saying the funniest Reading set ever, and that seems to be a thing that a lot of people feel about that, but I don't think it's funny. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I kind of think just a bunch of knobheads who can't sit through 15 minutes of a band bullying 2 teenagers off stage. I don't find that funny at all. I just think it's kind of shitty. So yeah, I've always felt like they got kind of hard done by as a result of that, and it very much sent their career into a bit of a tailspin, and I think they were dropped by their label the next year. So their career kind of pretty much undone by a bunch of gatekeeping idiots who couldn't bear to have their party invaded for even a few minutes by something that was slightly outside their comfort zone. But on a happier note, after years of not really being in the public eye, they did actually make a bit of a return. Had a second album kind of out of the blue. The producer Max Tundra decided he wanted to write and produce an album for them, so it was maybe about 2011 there was a second Daphne and Celeste album, which is really good from the bits I've heard. They've obviously grown up, but there's still a fair amount of the old attitude there, but captured within a slightly more grown up and really quite interesting electropop that they're doing. It obviously didn't set the world alight or anything, but it was pretty cool to see them actually doing something new and something that did actually genuinely sound good. And I believe they've kind of kept at it ever since. They do still pop up doing shows here and there, and I would imagine they're probably very entertaining live, and hopefully they've not been bottled off stage ever since. But yeah, seeing that video about that performance did just put Daphne and Celeste back in my mind after years of not thinking about them at all. And then the other part of this week's equation came from seeing another video from a UK festival, this time from 2014, which was a video of Babymetal playing at the Sonisphere festival, which struck me as, at the time, being actually quite a similar sort of setup to the Daphne and Celeste situation. A new act getting a short slot on the main stage of a big festival, largely catering towards white rock audiences with a potentially very hostile crowd. Because although Sonisphere is a metal festival and Babymetal are, a metal band, Sonisphere, particularly that year, is a very traditional lineup in a lot of ways. I think headlined by Iron Maiden and Metallica. And although there'd been a campaign among fans to get Babymetal moved onto the main stage, because I think they're originally just going to be on some smaller stage, at the time, just generally in the rock press, there was quite a lot of hostility towards Babymetal. Quite a lot of old school metal fans were of the opinion that this wasn't real metal and they had no place at Sonisphere. So quite a similar situation to what Daphne and Celeste were facing. But the fact that that particular performance turned out completely the opposite way to how Daphne and Celeste did actually helped establish Babymetal and the genre of Kawaii Metal as a sort of legitimate force. And they've kind of gone from strength to strength ever since, really. Kawaii Metal's an interesting thing. I end up talking about genre an awful lot on these videos, obviously, and quite often I arrive at the conclusion that quite a lot of genres that we talk about are actually kind of things that are imposed upon loosely related groups of artists after the fact by critics or music historians. A lot of the time, when you're actually there, it's impossible to pinpoint these things as a coherent movement or genre, and there's no way of actually really saying who invented it or at what time it came into being. But Kawaii Metal is one of those rare genres where you can absolutely pinpoint exactly where it comes from, because it was born with the creation of Babymetal. And Babymetal have a pretty fascinating story and quite a lot of interesting and convoluted lore and stuff around them. I'm not going to go too far into it. In the course of preparing this week's track, I did end up coming up with another idea pertaining to a Babymetal song, so if I do end up bringing that one to fruition, I'll probably end up talking a bit more about them. At the moment, all I really want to talk about is the creation of the band and of this new genre leading up to that Sonisphere performance. So really the architect of Babymetal is a guy called Kei Kobayashi, who's a producer and artist relations guy who works for a Muse talent agency over in Japan. And in 2010 he was assigned to be one of the producers of this new teen idol girl group that Amuse was putting together called Sakura Gakuin, which I think means like Cherry Blossom School or Cherry Blossom Academy, which is a sort of school-themed girl group with a rotating membership based around secondary education. So people enter the group at the age of 10 and leave when they finish compulsory education at 15. So theoretically, Amuse could just keep this group running for as long as they wanted, just replacing people as they graduate. Although it wasn't a school, it was just school-themed. It actually did function as a way of training new, very young performers who would go through these kind of 5 years of really rigorous artist training to emerge at the end of their compulsory education ready to go on to other fields and stuff. So you can kind of see why it was a good move for them. One of the interesting things about it was being school-themed, as well as having just the sort of full group numbers that they do. They also had these subunits which were based on kind of after-school clubs, which allowed smaller groups of the girls in the group to perform in different styles with different subject matter, adding a bit more variety to the act. And there were all kinds of these things. There was a baton twirling club called Twinkle Stars. There was like a cookery club who, sang songs about food, which is called Mini Patty, and everyone dressed in little chef's outfits and things. But the most notable club that came out of this was obviously the Heavy Music Club, which was known as Babymetal. And this was the brainchild of Kei Kobayashi, because although he was assigned to produce this very kid-focused J-pop group, his real passion was heavy metal, and he'd been thinking to himself for some time that the metal scene had grown a bit stale in Japan. There weren't really so many exciting new bands coming through. The audience was growing older, and he really wanted to try and find a way to get new audiences into metal. I think just before the founding of Sakura Gakuin, he'd heard another Amuse act, Karen Girls, and had noted that the lead singer of this group, one Suzuka Nakamoto, already had this really strong, forceful, clear voice. And I guess he had this revelation that with a voice like that, you could probably cut through the sound of a full-blown metal band. So when Sakura Gakuin started and Suzuka became one of the initial group of kids involved in that, he obviously seized his opportunity to claim her as a member of the Heavy Music Club to start this hybrid J-pop heavy metal band. But yeah, with just her, it would still just be a metal band with a young female singer, which isn't too revolutionary. He really wanted to emphasize the kind of hybrid nature of metal, but also this kind of J-pop idol sensibility. So to complement Sue, he brings in the two youngest, smallest members of Sakura Gakuin, which is Yui Mizuno and Mo Kikuchi, to be backing vocalists and dancers. So it's this full-on J-pop stage presentation, but given a metal twist with these kind of traditional idol costumes, but reworked to look like sort of gothic samurai armor. And these songs that combine bright, peppy, kind of super cute sensibility that you get in some of this J-pop stuff, but with these crunching, down-tuned riffs, blast beats, shredding solos, and it really took off. So while all the girls were still performing their regular duties as members of Sakura Gakuin, they also started getting out and about, playing more widely just with Babymetal on its own. And when Su-Metal graduated from Sakura Gakuin, Babymetal split off and became its own independent group. Yui and Moa continued to do both for the next couple of years until they graduated as well. I think it was maybe during the summer of Yui and Moa's last year in Sakura Gakuin that they got the call to come and play at Sonisphere. The Gimme Chocolate video had gone viral on YouTube and had made them a bit of a global sensation, and that had created this groundswell of support that had brought them to the attention of Sonisphere's organisers. So they were given this 25-minute slot. And as I say, there was a lot of hostility from a fair chunk of the metal audience. In my experience, metal fans, quite a lot like punk fans, that being kind of my particular subculture I come from, in the vast majority of them are just lovely and welcoming and really open-minded. But at the same time, there's always a chunk of the fan base who fix their idea of what that music should be when they become a fan of it and don't want it to change, don't want it to move past what they like, and don't want anyone else to ever come into it. So they've always been militant gatekeepers. But in spite of all that, they still turn up, they go on at their allotted, early on in the day, broad daylight, 25-minute time slot. And They absolutely killed it. I think the whole set is up on YouTube from various fan cams and stuff. There's only one professionally filmed song, I think, which is the set closer, which is Ijame Dame Zetai, which is this rip-roaring power metal song about how bad bullying is. If you get a chance to check that out, I'd strongly recommend it. It's just awesome because you can just see the last remaining outliers of the crowd being won over. I think it's probably easy enough for metal fans to sit at home watching a video of a daft throwaway song about eating chocolate and dismiss something, but then I think maybe faced with the band on stage, with the Kami band, the backing group, who are all absolutely incredible shredding metal players anyway, but then fronted by these three kids who are just performing with utter, total conviction, that kind of makes all that cynicism just wash away, and you can just see it happening in this video. It's pretty joyous, actually. So strongly recommend checking that out. But yeah, just seeing that really kind of made me think back to the Daphne and Celeste show and just think of how these two ostensibly quite similar situations ended up with just drastically different outcomes. And there's all kinds of factors that play into that, but part of me was just thinking, if only Daphne and Celeste had been backed up by some kind of kick-ass metal band, maybe they would have gone down a bit better, which is sort of what led to me trying to make this week's song. So in this week's alternative universe scenario, we go back to 1999, and in this alternative timeline, Kei Kobayashi, Babymetal, as he becomes, has been sent by a muse over to the States to go and scout for American talent to try and broaden a muse's influence in the world pop sphere. So he's looking for pop acts, but in the back of his mind, he's already got this idea that maybe combining some kind of teen pop and metal might be the way forward, because he's not super keen on the new metal stuff that's happening at the time. He feels like it's a bit regressive, a bit limiting. He wants to bring in a younger, more diverse audience to metal, so that's going on in the back of his mind. And he auditions various people, eventually comes across Daphne and Celeste, and they've got this bright, energetic approach, but they've also got this bratty kind of tough attitude, and he thinks, maybe that's the perfect thing to pair with metal to create this hybrid that I've been dreaming of. So teams them up with a backing band of the finest heavy metal musicians in all of Japan, and they record their debut single Stick You, which is this perfect synthesis of dayglow pop and chuggy kind of thrash, and that causes some ripples in the rock world, and as a result they come to the attention of the Reading Festival organisers, who decide to bring this band in just for a brief opening set on the main stage. And at first, when they walk out on stage, the crowd a bit unsure what to make of them and even quite hostile, but once they launch into this kind of high octane metal pop, everyone's won over and Daphne and Celeste have triumphed. Kawaii Metal really can only ever be a Japanese thing. I think the concept of kawaii as a sort of, it's a very specific Japanese idea of being cute or adorable, which doesn't exactly translate to Western culture, but it seemed to me that if anyone was going to be an act that could have done Kawaii Metal, maybe it was Daphne and Celeste. So yeah, in trying to turn Daphne and Celeste into a Kawaii Metal act, my first step was just getting the isolated vocal, dropping it into GarageBand and getting it synced up. It's not a very good isolation. It's definitely from a stem splitter rather than a studio a cappella, so pretty messy track, but I tried to mask it as best I could. Got that synced up and sped up because I wanted a good driving tempo. Next step was programming the drums, so wanted really tight driving metal drums with some good time shifts and standard metal devices, so mainly a sort of mid-tempo thrashy chug for the choruses, loads of double kick, and then double time in the verses. But then some of the verses I'd drop the acoustic kit out and add in a drum machine instead for a bit of a contrast, because certainly if you listen to some of those Babymetal records, they quite like to throw in some more sort of poppy electronic stuff along with the metal instrumentation, so you'll quite often hear almost EDM sounding synths in with these heavy guitars, that kind of thing. So I thought I'd just try and mix some of that element in too, to emphasise the sort of pop and the metal sides coming together. Threw some bass on there as well, nothing at all fancy, just tried to keep it as tight as possible, sticking to the kick drums and just trying to really reinforce those hard-hitting double kicks. Guitar-wise, I've got 4 guitars on there, so 2 rhythm guitars, pan left and right as usual. Fairly standard metal stuff. I came up with a thrashy riff with some kind of squealy pinch harmonics for the verse, and then the chorus is a little bit more tremolo picky stuff, sometimes in unison, sometimes in harmony, just powering everything along. And then another 2 guitars which add power metal-y harmony leads, quite fun, sort of bright, lively harmony leads, and then as the verses develop as well, they're adding extra layers of harmony and or dissonance over the verse guitars too. So I was already sounding quite full at this point, but then I've got those breakdown verses which needed something, and I've also got the spoken intro on the vocal track as well, which I needed to do something with, so added some keyboards. Firstly, started off with just some piano for the intro. Something that you hear on a few Babymetal songs is they quite like to do slightly wistful, almost neoclassical intros to throw you off the scent before hitting you around the head with these chunky riffs, so I had a bit of that with the piano, and I think a bit of synth pad in there too. And the synth pad returns later on in the breakdown verses with the drum machine, and also there's an arpeggiated synth in there too that just bubbles away and adds a bit more of that sort of slightly EDM-ish undercurrent to those bits too. And then I also added a synth lead which I used to just reinforce some of the guitar riffs and also add an extra line of harmony on those guitar leads too. So hopefully overall I got the balance between kind of cute poppy elements and aggressive metal elements about right. And then for the video, I started out by just finding some footage of Daphne Celeste doing the song on TV. I used a couple of different clips because both of them were missing some bits. I think there's one from CD UK, which was an edit that misses the last verse, and one from Top of the Pops that misses another part from the start, so I mixed and matched between the two. I wanted them to have a backing band that looked appropriately metal, so thankfully managed to find some footage of the Kami band, the Eastern Kami band, who are the original Japanese musicians who backed up Babymetal, doing their own performance in some club in Japan. Sort of edited them in to try and make it look a bit like they're backing up Daphne and Celeste there. Sadly, they're not in their distinctive robes and face paint that they would have worn on a Babymetal show, but it was quite rare to find footage of them that was so clearly focused on them without obviously all this spectacle happening in front of them, so that was definitely the footage to use, I thought. So I hope you enjoyed this one. A bit out of left field, and I'm not sure how well people will take to it, but I had tremendous fun just coming up with these daft metal riffs and what have you. I don't know, I think metal Daphne and Celeste sounds pretty tough, but yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you did enjoy it, please like, subscribe, share, all of that stuff really helps. Also, if you've got any thoughts or suggestions on stuff that I can do in coming weeks and months, any artists or songs or genres you'd like me to look at, do let me know. I'm forever appreciative of your suggestions, but otherwise that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching, and I will hope to see you next time.